Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this LSE public event on why we're getting poorer. A fantastic book by Cahal Moran. We'll get started. My name is Ganga Sridhar. I am assistant professor in the Department of Psychological and Behavioral Sciences at the LSE, a colleague of Cahal's. It's my great honor to chair this event today. First of all, a big welcome to all of you, and thank you for making it out. It's fantastic to see so many people here and a full-up auditorium. So welcome. I'm looking forward to an amazing discussion afterwards. A few notes on housekeeping. The event will be live streamed. A podcast will be up later if everything goes well and we have no technical issues. And we're hoping that we have a couple hundred people signed up for the live, apart from the number of people here in this nearly full auditorium. So it's going to be a good discussion, I think. So I'll just do a quick introduction to Cahal, and then I'll just give the floor to him so he can talk about this book. So Cahal Moran is a visiting fellow at the Department of Psychological and Behavioral Sciences and a behavioral economist who looks at how biases and heuristic affect consumer behavior. He's also the creator of a YouTube channel called Unlearning Economics, which has over 240,000 subscribers and really seeks to, and is a brilliant public resource. It really seeks to demystify economics for everybody in a very compassionate and grounded way by relating it to people's everyday lives and experiences. This really takes economics out of the clasp of, say, technocratic narrative and dialogue and really brings it out to the people, so really democratizes it. And this is not the first time he's tried to do that. When he was just a postgraduate student at the University of Manchester, he co-authored a book called Econocracy, which really tried to figure out why economics had failed its students and the public to predict some of the most, huge events of our time in terms of the global financial crisis in 2007-8. And really interrogate why economics was so divorced from people's lived experiences and reality. This book sparked not only a student movement, which sort of really challenged the way economics was taught, but also a policy movement in the form of rethinking economics. So I urge you guys to check out both the channel to understand a bit of what Cahal is doing, and also the book, because it really is the first sort of, I think, intellectual work and a foundation for the book, which is coming up right now. So I have a copy of the book here. You can buy it outside when we're done, and I think Cahal will be up for signing it as well. Might give you a cute message. I got an excellent one. And I had the best time reading this book. Now, writing a book about why we're all getting poorer is not covering the best news story out there, right? It's not about cute, cuddly dogs or cats. It's literally about how people perceive and their lived experiences, but also actually their purchasing power, like very serious economic. It's tough. It's a tough one, right? But not only did I find myself learning as I read the book, I found myself laughing loads, because this book is funny and it's grounded and draws on experiences that we all actually go through, whether it's watching football and rugby or eating chocolate and why that's so expensive or why the prices of that has changed, or even just like sitcoms, which are popular. So there are these really interesting anecdotes and experiences that pepper the book to not just make subjects which are quite heavy accessible, but also actually make it more human, right? So it's really moving outside abstract concepts like the invisible hand and markets and taking it into people's lives and homes. And I think that's one reason why we should all be reading this book. It covers a wide range of topics, right from what is money, what is debt, to what about the global transport and logistics system, right? And it actually does it in an interesting way, right? So he busts myths. And for me, I think what was particularly appealing and also made the book, again, quite compassionate was he drew upon a range of resources and sources. So not just economists, but sociologists, anthropologists, activists, and even billionaires, right? So again, urge you to read the book. And I'll hand over the floor to Cahal right now so he can actually tell you what it's about.
Yeah, thanks very much, Ganga. That was a really glowing profile. I don't know if I'll quite be able to do it justice, but I'll give it a go. So, the mic's already fallen down. Disaster. I flail my hands around quite a lot when I speak, so 1 second. So the idea for the title of this book actually came from the chief economist of the Bank of England, Hugh Pill. When I was in the midst of writing it, and I wasn't really sure what the title was going to be, he announced that Britons needed to accept that they are poorer. He was, of course, speaking at the height of the cost of living crisis. During this crisis, inflation went into the double digits. In Britain, in countries across the world, it was actually slightly worse in Britain, owing to numerous factors that I'll talk about. And it wasn't just the fact that people had taken a really serious hit to their standard of living. Inflation did come down eventually, but that didn't mean prices went back down. People saw a 20 to 30% hit to their purchasing power, to their standards of living, that it was in some sense permanent. It still persists to this day and people are still struggling with it. But the institution that Hugh Pill works for, the Bank of England, is tasked with managing inflation. And what really struck me was not just this crisis, which was caused by numerous factors. Most notably, the Russian invasion of Ukraine triggered Western sanctions on Russia, the price of oil and gas went up, people struggled with their energy bills. There were also, as Ganga alluded to when she mentioned the logistics network, there were huge problems coming out of COVID and lockdown, huge queues at ports, and globalization, which had once seemed so tightly coordinated, kind of fell apart for a bit. That led to scarcity of goods and further increases in prices. Now, the way we manage this in the UK and in countries across the world is through inflation targeting. When inflation is high, the Bank of England increases interest rates. That is supposed to encourage saving, discourage borrowing by making it more expensive, suck demand out of the economy, reduce the boom and reduce inflationary pressure with it. Conversely, if the economy isn't doing so well, you can slash rates, stimulate spending, stimulate the economy, and inflation will probably go up with it. Now, another moment while I was writing this book came to me when a family friend asked me, he said, "Why is this our way of managing inflation?" Thank you. Because it seems that the primary way that we have to deal with the cost of living crisis is to increase the cost of living. It's well known that the primary way that interest rates work is through housing. Most people who have mortgages have variable rate mortgages. They are attached directly to the Bank of England's base rate. When that goes up, their monthly payments go up, often substantially. If you're a renter, that's likely to be passed on to you. My rent increased by quite a lot during this period, as I'm sure many people's did. So a cost of living crisis that was caused by increasing energy prices, increasing prices of microchips and automobiles, we were managing that by making housing more expensive. Why? Why is that our tool for dealing with that kind of crisis? When people are really struggling, why is it that we choose to make their lives harder? Now, you might say, well, it kind of works. Interest rates go up, inflation goes down. That is true, and inflation did go down, probably largely owing to the increase in interest rates. But my concern is whether we solve the disease of inflation by essentially killing the patient. You crash the economy. You reduce GDP growth, you reduce wage inflation, so you reduce the amount people are earning. That does take the steam out of the economy, but it hurts a lot of people in the process. Can we think of better ways of doing this? It's not just inflation, and it's not just interest rate management. Time and time again, when I've looked at the economy, I've seen that our modern economy, which seems to be beset by crisis, we lurch from crisis to crisis. in the current era. When these hit, we don't have the right tools to manage them. We use tools that don't really seem to work, or they seem to make a lot of people's lives worse in the process. In many cases, they seem to benefit the rich over the average person. Now, I think an extremely formative event for me was the 2008 financial crisis, which hit just as I started studying economics at A-level. This was in 2007. In some of our first classes in September, there was a bank run on Northern Rock in the UK. Now, this was actually the first bank to go globally in what would become known as the Great Financial Crisis. And that recession was unprecedented. People didn't see it coming. I think it was the largest recession and the first instance of bank runs since the Great Depression 70 years earlier. GDP fell by about 5% between 2007 and 2009. We didn't actually see a full recovery back to the pre-crisis level until 2013. That was a 6-year recovery. That's very long by historic standards. And ever since then, GDP in the UK, as well as Europe and the Eurozone, has just kind of pootled along. We never really got the boom that you're supposed to get after a recession. Now again, it wasn't just the crash. It was how we chose to respond to the crash. The Labour government were kicked out in the UK, understandably, owing to the fact that they presided over the financial crash, and the incoming coalition government, led by the Tories, decided to embark on an ambitious programme of austerity, tens of billions in spending cuts. It was thought that we should reduce the deficit, reduce the amount that the government was borrowing, fix the government finances. Everyone was tightening their belts during the recession. Why shouldn't the government do so too? Now, it's my opinion that this was a case of misdiagnosis and misdirection. The deficit wasn't very high before the crisis. Whenever a recession hits, the economy declines, economic activity goes down, tax revenues decline, unemployment goes up, benefits paid out to unemployed people increase. That explained the sudden rise in the deficit. Once you get back on a sure footing, once the economy starts growing again, the deficit does tend to reduce. Now, essentially, this misses the crucial role that governments have in an economy. Governments provide a range of essential services that underpin a lot of social life, a lot of economic activity, a lot of people's welfare. Just taking these away is not a good thing for the economy. And I think this abject failure to understand this point was illustrated most clearly by George Osborne's words. Because in 2015, he said that reducing the deficit was fixing the roof while the sun was shining. Like a family, while things were going well, you would squirrel away a few quid for a rainy day. But this metaphor came back to bite George Osborne, because he said they were going to fix the roof while the sun was shining. Years later, his cuts led to the collapse of an actual roof in a school in Kent, as well as the roofs of many other schools across the country. Not just schools, hospital wings have collapsed, rendering them unusable. Now, in 2022, the Bennett Institute at Cambridge found that what they call physical and social infrastructure has declined in almost every area across England. This is things like schools, this is things like GPs, mental health services, hospitals. It's also things like train stations, bus routes. 1/5 of bus routes in the UK have disappeared over this period. And fares have only gone up in the meantime. Now, it seems to me that if people can't get around, if they can't get to work, if they're not getting a good education, if they're not healthy, that is hardly the basis for a strong and growing economy. Now, this issue pops up again and again, that we make these short-sighted decisions that are focused on penny pinching, but actually come back to bite us. In 2013, David Cameron ordered civil servants to cut what he called the green crap. Now, this meant things like retrofitting homes so that they were more energy efficient. It meant subsidies to renewable energy, solar and wind in particular. As a result, we've kind of fallen behind in the renewable energy race. When Russia invaded Ukraine and we became much more, and we realized how reliant we were on oil and gas from Russia, the think tank Carbon Brief estimated that the downstream cost of these cuts to the green crap was £150 per family per year. Again, we had failed to invest in our economy, and this had cost us down the line. And of course, the government had to bail people out so that they could pay their bills. So it didn't even work in terms of the government budget. So, the worldview of these governments, this government, the Tory government that lasted 14 years, I think was best summarised by Dominic Raab. In 2017, he said, "I can think of lots of things that I would like to avoid making difficult decisions on, and lots of areas like health services or schools that I want to put even more money in. But unless you've got a strong economy creating the revenue, it's just a childish wish list." So here we can see Raab's view encapsulated. He thinks that the economy is something that we have to grow. It exists kind of separate from these social aims, and if we grow it enough, if we've got enough revenue, then we can afford social services and public services. Specifically, Raab was actually responding to a woman who was criticising his cuts to disability benefits. Now, in Raab's worldview, that's just a cost, because disability benefits, they'll typically go from people who are disproportionately working to those who aren't. So it's a question of, do you raise taxes? Can we afford it? But there was a study done in Denmark on cuts to disability benefits, and it found that they saved almost no money whatsoever. Why? Well, the thing about care for people with disabilities is that it needs to be done no matter what. You can withdraw the benefits, and if those benefits were being used to pay for a carer, somebody who knows the person is going to have to drop out of work and take care of them anyway. In this case, because care is historically disproportionately done by women, this led to quite a notable withdrawal of women from the workforce. That reduced tax revenues, therefore the policy didn't save any money, as well as making a whole bunch of people's lives much more difficult in the process. So whether we're talking about inflation targeting and the cost of living crisis, whether we're talking about investment in essential services like transport, health, and education, whether we're talking about the environment or care, we find again and again that the way that we've chosen to manage the economy, particularly in the UK, is self-defeating. And it's no wonder that, of course, this government missed their deficit targets, that the economy was growing at a pretty low rate, that our rates of investment in the UK are low. We've had stagnation in real wages at a rate that has not been seen since the Napoleonic Wars. In summary, it hasn't worked. So, now, this book isn't just about austerity. I split the book into two halves. In the first half, I talk about the unevenness of the economy. This is essentially inequality. At one end of the spectrum, we have billionaires who their wealth seems to be growing without limit. It seems that they influence disproportionately. What's going on? This will be clearer. Oh, is that better? Could you just not hear me? Were you all just being polite? Ranting at the front. All right, well, you'll be able to hear like the second half anyway. That's jokes. All right. So, I was mid-float. So we have these billionaires who seem to dominate, among other things, the news cycle, their own industries, other industries and media that they buy up, politics and government that they get involved in. People with just unimaginable amounts of wealth and power that can just decide they're going to do something and direct a whole bunch of resources, more than you'll earn in your life, towards that end. At the other end, we have, of course, a lot of people living in poverty. We have this in poor countries, and we have this also in rich countries. Things like left behind communities where the jobs have dried up following globalization and other forces, and where you have things like the deaths of despair in the US and the opioid crisis. So there is a vast amount of inequality in our economy, and that's one reason that it's not working for the average person. It does seem to be kind of working for some people, but it's a rich few. Now, the other issue that I highlight in the second half of the book is that the economy is dysfunctional. So rather than this being a story of inequality and the rich winning out while the poor and middle class don't do so well, this is a story where some things just don't really seem to work, and this affects everyone, rich and poor alike. So a good example would be housing. And actually, when my landlord increased my rent, and this was after I'd finished the book, this became very clear to me how messed up housing is, because he was trying to increase my rent by quite a lot, and he tried to increase it by a third. And I said, that's ridiculous, I just absolutely cannot afford that. And he's a pretty nice guy. He said, okay, I'll increase it by maybe half that amount. And he said, but my wife's going to have to get a job for us to make ends meet. And he said, you know, if you see anything that suits her, then could you please just let us know? And I just thought, my God, when the landlords are struggling, like, things are really, really bad, right? Like, because the truth is that a lot of people, like my landlord, they're in a buy-to-let situation. A lot of the rent just goes straight into a mortgage. What they're looking for is an asset, some financial security, a pension, something to help them raise their children. He's not super rich. He's not spending it all on a yacht or something. And so there are these really deep problems with how we've chosen to design our economy, how we've chosen to treat housing as this financial asset that leads to an entire population, generally older generations who have housing, who are invested in house prices staying high, and a whole bunch of people disproportionately in my generation for whom house prices are just so high that buying a house feels completely out of reach. And all of us are paying quite a lot, and only a very few people are benefiting. I mean, in the UK, like 10 people own all of the land, so it's still kind of about the rich, but it's like the overwhelming majority of people, including the middle class, are bought into this model of housing. Now, this book is clearly centered on my experience becoming an economist, studying economics, coming of age during the 2008 financial crisis, going through austerity, Brexit, political crisis, the pandemic, the cost of living crisis, all with inequality and climate change raging on in the background. But I don't want you to think that it's just about the UK or even that it's just about the West. Now, there are exceptions to getting poorer. When I've been speaking to Chinese publishers about the title of the book, they said, can we change it? Because nobody in China feels like they're getting poorer. Their GDP growth's been like 10% for decades. You know, it just doesn't resonate with a Chinese audience. So maybe it doesn't apply so much in China and in some other East Asian countries that have been success stories in the global economy. On the other hand, there are plenty of places across the world where I think some of the dynamics that we're experiencing in the West and our current trajectory will resonate. One of these is Brazil. Now, Brazil is a country that was, between 1960 and 1980, was growing very, very fast. Had it continued at its pace then, it would have caught up with European countries by the year 2000. In fact, it stagnated, its manufacturing sector was decimated, and there are a lot of people living on insecure jobs without stable employment. And what you see in Brazil is also, as well as stagnation, economically, is also immense inequality, with the wealthy elite literally living in fortresses, while the rest of the population pick up jobs by the side, or essentially just act as servants for this wealthy elite. Now, the economist Alex Hochuli came up with this term Brazilianization, and he saw it as something, a place that the West was headed. And it's a long quote, but he puts it much better than me, so I'll read it out in full. He said, "The West's involution finds its mirror image in the original country of the future, the nation doomed forever to remain the country of the future, the one that never reaches its destination, Brazil. The Brazilianization of the world is our encounter with a future denied. The sense that things don't work as they should is now widely shared across the political spectrum. Welcome to Brazil. Here, the only people satisfied with their situation are financial elites and venal politicians. Everyone complains, but everyone shrugs their shoulders. This slow degradation of society is not so much a runaway train, but more of a jittery roller coaster, occasionally holding out promise of ascent, yet never breaking free from the tracks. We always come back to where we started, shaken and disoriented, haunted by what might have been." Now, I don't know about you, but to me that sounds like the last 15 years of British government. Now, you could say something similar about India. Since the pandemic, India has had what's called a K-shaped recovery. Now, if you think about a recession, line goes down, GDP goes down. A V-shaped recovery is when you bounce straight back. We don't do those anymore. An L-shaped recovery is where you sort of stagnate, maybe a little bit of a rise after the crash. That's what we had in the UK following the financial crisis. But a K-shaped recovery, I'm not going to have enough hands to do it, but you basically have two directions, one for the rich, one for the poor. Since the pandemic in India, the rich have been gaining. Meanwhile, 1 billion Indians, as in 1/8 of the planet, have no spending money whatsoever. The pandemic dried up their savings, and they just are no longer financially secure, if they ever were. As in Brazil, you do have a situation with a very wealthy elite, and you have a situation where most of the population are employed in an informal sector, where they're selling food by the street, or driving tourists around in pedicabs, or even begging, or committing crimes to get by. Now, this K-shaped recovery is very relevant, because I want to finish by talking about the USA. It's a very interesting case study. Unlike the UK and most European countries, the US has actually done quite well in terms of traditional economic indicators since the financial crisis. It's actually done especially well since the pandemic. In fact, the divide between the US and Europe is so big that you could kind of think of the US as a separate category. If you're talking about rich, middle, and low-income countries, the USA would be very rich, along with some oil states and Liechtenstein and places like that. And there has been this debate in the USA. It's called the vibe session, or people sometimes call it the vibes are off. And what this refers to is the fact that by most conventional economic indicators, growth, unemployment, wages even some more sophisticated measures, it seems like people are doing well. And yet, nobody is happy with the state of the economy. You can see this because during the cost of living crisis, Biden was kicked out and Trump took his place. But this has continued even into the Trump era. We saw just recently that growth in the second quarter of 2025 was unexpectedly high in the USA. The fine print revealed that this was driven entirely, not mostly, entirely by the top 20%. Only they have seen gains in their income. Just like India, there is a K-shape to the economy, and it is no longer benefiting the average person. It's no longer even benefiting people at the 80th percentile who are relatively rich. It's only benefiting the very rich. Now, it is my contention, and I can't say I have all the answers here by any means, but it's my contention that our conventional economic analysis has ignored the things that matter the most to people. Things like housing, things like essential public services, transportation, things like care, things like the environment. If you look at these, you'll see that they were targeted by austerity in the UK, and they do seem to have gotten worse on a number of dimensions. But in the USA, that's also the case. The price has increased, seemingly without limit, of things like higher education and healthcare. And so we are no longer paying attention to these areas of the economy that matter to people. And I think that that offers at least some explanation for this vibe session. So, I can't really claim to have all of the answers to this, but I think for a long time, our economic analysis has simply not been asking the right questions. And I'll leave it there. Should we change it to the book instead of the US? Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
Hello? Yeah. Okay.
Hello. Good.
Yeah. Thank you, Cahal. I will ask you a couple of questions and then open up the questions to the audience. We'll also take questions from the live stream after that. So thank you very much for the overview of the book and a couple of the core arguments there. One thing I think a lot of us can relate to and feel is it's quite expensive to be poor.
Yes. Yeah.
Right? And you make that point in the book, I think, quite convincingly. I was hoping you could talk about the main policy solution that we often see in the politics, which is growth, growth, growth. And do you think that that will help ease how expensive it is to be poor, or what are the problems with that? You alluded to it in terms of successful indicators in the last slide. So
yeah, I think that economic growth isn't something that I'm against wholesale, and it's like maybe a necessary condition for things to work. Generally speaking, a growing economy is associated with things like low unemployment. People like to feel that their living standards are rising, that they've got a chance, and economic growth can contribute to that. It's also associated and usually caused by technological changes that can be beneficial. But I think what we've seen is that it's just, while it's a necessary condition, it's not a sufficient condition, right? And you see that with the K-shaped recovery in India and also in the USA. When growth is only concentrated among a few, that still counts as GDP growth, right? Incomes are still growing, but it's a question of whose incomes. So for me, growth is something that I would say is actually a happy byproduct of pursuing good policies, and it's something that you don't necessarily want to target in its own right.
So growth as an instrument rather than an objective.
Yeah, totally. And GDP is our main objective, really. And despite everyone's been talking about moving away from GDP, and everyone knows it doesn't capture everything about life. You know, just because you pay for something doesn't mean that that's necessarily a quality of life improvement. But we still haven't moved away from it despite all the discussion.
Yeah. Thank you. So a second question I had was, I think you mentioned that there's actually room for inefficiencies in the book, which I thought was a really important argument, because I think apart from growth, the other thing you hear about is efficiency. in economics, it's seen as one of the core tenets, really. So I was wondering if you could explain one of the lines you used, which I found was quite funny but also important, is it's like expecting someone to function with one kidney.
Yeah.
And we're quite inefficient in terms of human bodies because we've got two.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if you could talk a bit about that in relation to the shocks that we've seen, whether it's the need, you spoke about a few of the shocks, many shocks actually in your lifetime studying this, but I was thinking about more existential shocks as well, such as climate change, or now you've got AI. I have to mention it, guys, sorry. You talk about AI. And then you've also got potential war and security spending expenses. So how do you see that play in the system, and what are the solutions for that, potentially, that you can talk about in the book? You mentioned things like housing. So, for instance, how can we prepare housing for that, for instance?
So I think during the supply chain crisis, as we came out of COVID, we discovered that we get most of the world's semiconductors from not just one country, but from one company within that country, right? The Taiwanese semiconductor manufacturing, the TMSC, the name escapes me. But we get almost all of the globe's microchips come from that company, right? And so what we found was when Taiwan was still in lockdown and when they had a backlog of orders owing to COVID, we couldn't get them anywhere. And therefore the price just went way, way up. And so we've seen this approach to globalization where basically the more efficient, the better, the more specialized, the better. It's great if Taiwan do this because they're the best at it. And it is true, they are absolutely the best at it. But what we've moved away from is this idea of redundancy, right? Kind of built-in redundancy. And that most countries which use microchips heavily, most of them will need to have factories that produce them. Because then, if due to whatever reason, pandemic, political crisis, climate crisis, natural disaster, factories in Japan have had to shut down because of natural disasters before, whatever the reason, there is somewhere to go to get the things that we rely on so much and that we use, even if they're maybe slightly lower quality, and this is what you said about it being not necessarily as efficient. But as a lot of biologists will know, often what we call resilience is traded off with efficiency. You can operate with one kidney, but if anything goes wrong, you're much, much more vulnerable to that shock. And I think that's how we've chosen to organize economies. They're so vulnerable.
Interesting. And so I guess that brings me to why you think, sort of a commitment to, say, growth for growth's sake, or a commitment for efficiency's sake. Why has that been so hard to budge from our political and policy landscape? And broadly connected to that, and maybe linking up to your former book, what is the role of economics? What sort of economics would you like to see? And what would you like to see change? Because now you've had some time to reflect. You've been in the institutions longer. You've got a more... Yeah. So what would you think are the strengths and weaknesses? And why do you think these things have not sort of budged?
It's tricky. With GDP, it's such a convenient number. I think it's very convenient for politicians, for economists, for the media, just to focus on this one thing. So despite the criticisms, that's one reason we haven't moved away from it. I also think that being anti-GDP isn't very politically appealing, because you're basically saying, I want to make you poorer. I don't want GDP growth, right? So I want to shrink the economy and I want to make people poorer. That's not something that is particularly going to sell. What I would like to see, and I mentioned that report by the Bennett Institute in Cambridge, which is headed by Diane Coyle. Now, she's done a lot of work on this, and she talks about essentially like a dashboard of indicators, right? So she talks about having indicators for like health and education, as well as for income. And I think there's maybe 6 different indicators that she advocates for. I think if you were monitoring those, you would have seen many of them decline, as I said, over the period of austerity. Over the period of high GDP growth in the USA, you would have seen lots of these actually declining. And that might have alerted us to the problems, and that might have helped us to anticipate some of the big political fallout that we're having from those problems. So I'm not sure, but a dashboard of indicators, it's also much less sexy. It's much more difficult to get people to care about 6 things at once when they just want a digestible number. So it's stubborn.
Complexity, in a way, and just the political infeasibility of a complex narrative.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to open it up to some questions from the audience. We'll have roving mics. Please just state your name, where you're from, and a very succinct, short question. So that gives Cahal time to answer. Yeah, there's one here.
Andrew Wallace, formerly of the Economist Intelligence Unit. And have been in business for about 40, 50 years,
Sure.
All around the world. And the big thing that's changed during my time is the shift of manufacturing to China and other countries.
Yeah.
And still in Germany, we have a fair balance between manufacturing and services. But in Britain, as soon as the wind blows cold, we get a cold. So do you think manufacturing, or the dearth of manufacturing, is one aspect that you could comment on?
I'll take another question
Okay.
from the audience.
My name is Julian. I'm a student at St. Olaf's. And my question is, how much does your book cost?
Right, we'll take those two questions and then we'll go online. Go for it, Cahal.
Well, I should know that, really. So last time I checked, it was £22, and a couple of people have commented on the irony of the title when it's that expensive. If you want to wait, the paperback will be out in March, which will be a bit cheaper. So as for manufacturing, I mean, I think with manufacturing, the reality is that a lot of manufactured goods are only provided in a handful of countries, and that does seem to serve the entire globe. So what I mean by that is you can't just have another BMW in Brazil, in the UK, right? You can't do that. There is already sufficient provision of automobiles. And so I don't think that the sort of classic, reliable manufacturing job is something that could ever apply everywhere. And certainly with the growth of more countries and the entry of China into the global economy and technological changes, that's probably less true than it even once was. And, I'm a big fan of moving more towards a care economy, to be honest. I think things like care, providing care for people, they're much less emissions intensive, they are extremely fulfilling, and it's just something that we've chosen not to fund and support. And I was speaking to somebody who was interviewing a lot of manufacturing workers, and they said a lot of the former miners in the UK, some of the former miners in the UK had moved into a caring role, and they found that it was extremely fulfilling. It was an excellent replacement for that kind of manufacturing job. It was very meaningful and purposeful. So I think that we need to not lose our focus on manufacturing. Obviously, it still matters. It will continue to matter. But we need to think more about other ways of providing employment and fund care more.
And you also mention green industry jobs as well in the book.
Yeah.
And moving towards sort of more artificial intelligence, sort of like manufacturing at home too.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So I think you can fund. There's something called friend shoring or like near shore. I hate that name, friend shoring. But like you're bringing. That's what I was talking about with resilience. You're bringing manufacturing into your own borders, right, or to someone who's like a close neighbour and a close ally. But I don't think that's going to provide employment for like the majority of the population. I think it's more a question of like where you get the goods from.
Cool, thank you. I'm going to take two questions from the live stream. I'm going to sort of paraphrase these questions from Vire Strau, which is an economic bubble real or excessive exuberance? And does a bubble artificially inflate salary, pension expectations and costs in general?
Just any bubble, just a general bubble.
An economic bubble.
Is it real? Well, can you read the question again?
Is an economic bubble real or is it excessive exuberance? So I guess in terms of animal spirits. And does a bubble inflate salary, pension expectations and costs?
I mean, so that's quite a complicated question. I feel like to ask, is a bubble real? A bubble, I think, by definition, isn't real, is it? A bubble is an excessive pricing of a given asset. So by that definition, it probably wouldn't be real. It is what they call in the question exuberance. Does it lead to inflated pension and salary expectations? I mean, a lot of pension funds are invested in stocks. I can see how a bubble might lead to that. But I do expect a lot of pensioners would disagree with me that their expectations are inflated. So I don't think the problem is that we're giving too much in pensions, for the record.
Cool. Second question from the live stream, which is, it sounds like, it's very brief. Triple lock, discuss.
Okay, yeah. So this is like the way that we insure pensions against increases in the cost of living in the UK, and they get much more protection than pretty much anything else because it's like the highest rate of growth out of one of three, the RPI wage. I can't remember which it is, but like they're basically whatever the highest increases in the price indexes that the three different price indexes, they choose that one. I do think that given that, everything else has been undergoing cuts, it does seem reasonable that you wouldn't disproportionately protect pensions. That does seem unfair. But at the same time, I would rather extend the triple lock to everything than take it away from pensioners. So I think that that's something which is, I hope I've made this clear, I think that's something which is eminently affordable. And I think that when you provide for the population, that you can have positive social returns. And everything I said about care, of course, applies to the elderly, applies to pensions. So it's a false economy to cut that, in my opinion.
Thank you. Any questions from the audience? I want to take a lady. Any ladies? There we go. And then all the men, put your hands back up after that.
Hello, I'm Noor. I just started teaching A-level economics. I try to help students think more critically about the economy they'll inherit and the course itself. What's something you'd make sure every 17-year-old understood, especially as many of them go on to studying it here at university? I think you said you did as well.
Yes, yeah.
And the syllabus is very restrictive.
Okay, I'm gonna take another question before we come to that. I will take a question at the back there. Yeah? And then I might take one more question from the audience as well. We'll do three at a time. Right at the back, blue t-shirt. Yeah.
Yeah, hi there. I'm Henry Bushell from UCL studying economics. I just wanted to ask what you thought about the kind of like Gary Stevenson theory of why we're getting poorer, because obviously it's been brought to the forefront of everyone's kind of, he's been all over the news and everything. Yeah. So his answer would be, we're getting poorer because the 1% or the top 0.1% is getting richer. How much kind of credibility do you give that, or is that a big oversimplification in your opinion?
Perfect. Thank you very much. One more question, please. We'll take you down here. Yes. Keep your hand up so they can see you. Yeah.
My name is Fauzan. I'm from Hendon, and my question is: given the past 14 years of austerity, do you think that the current Labour government is just unlucky with the current state of the economy, or can they use their power to enforce policies that actually help us stop getting poorer?
Okay, so I think we've got our three questions.
Yeah.
It's amazing to see all these hands raised. Cahal will be around after the event as well.
Yeah.
So please do catch him. Keep raising your hands as well.
So, curriculum, Gary, Labour, I've got written down. Curriculum, so my main thing with, and how I actually introduced the book, is when you're teaching people about the economy and economics, you need to make them aware that the economy is something that's very modern. This concept of the economy and markets and capitalism, they are something which hasn't existed forever. Now, you can think they're good or bad, but that historical context, I think, is absolutely vital, because sometimes when I first learned economics, it felt like it was just demand and supply, and this is markets, and they've existed forever. You know what I mean? So just a bit of historical context. I said a bit because you said the curriculum is very restrictive, but however you can do that, just make them aware that the economy has not always been. In fact, capitalism as we know it is only a few hundred years old, right? And we've been around for, 100,000 years or something?
I mean, a bit more history.
History, yeah, basically. Yeah, that's a much more concise way of putting it. With Gary, I'm friends with Gary, so I'll be careful what I say here. So I do think that, I'm glad that somebody is saying what he's saying, and I think that he is largely right. But like I said, half of my book is about inequality, but the other half is about dysfunctionality. And I think something like what I was talking about with the whole population being invested in housing as a financial asset, I think that's a much more tricky, thorny problem to untangle than just to say if we tax the super rich or take away their properties, which we can do. I don't mind doing that. But I don't think that's going to solve the housing crisis alone. I think there are some quite deep issues with our economy. So I would say that Gary is like half right. But in terms of getting the question onto the agenda, I mean, I've never seen anything quite like it. Like, it's incredible for, for the kind of economics that I advocate. So, with Labour, so it's really interesting because I talked about collapsed buildings, collapsed schools, collapsed hospitals. Labour did inherit that, right? And there's been a lot of ways that we've kind of made a straitjacket for ourselves. And underinvestment in the UK has created the current situation where we are poorer. And I think one way of thinking about how we are poorer is to think about this actual infrastructure and how that's fallen apart. That's not something you can solve in the short term. I don't think Labour can magic that away at all. On the other hand, they have completely bought in to the idea that the budget needs to be balanced, which I completely disagree with. Also, they've got these two rules which are just sort of made up. They're completely self-imposed. It's like, they need to balance what they call current spending, and they need to, eliminate the deficit by 2029. There's nothing ordained by God that means that those rules are required. They are and they had a much more expansionary platform until about 6 months before the election, and then they were just like, oh yeah, we're just not going to do that anymore. So although they are in one straitjacket, they've created another straitjacket for themselves.
Okay, great. I will take 3 questions from the live stream as well. How much does the gambling industry contribute to getting poorer?
Oh, God.
Their turnover is not over 15 billion a year.
So this is something that I don't know a lot about, the gambling industry. I am aware that they do tend to target poorer areas with very, very addictive machines. And you can understand why during a time of economic decline and hardship, people would end up gambling more, right? Because, it's a way to get a win. It's a way to have some kind of hope at a time when a lot of people don't have hope. So in terms of their financial contribution, I don't know enough about it to say, but it's a really valuable thing to point out.
Okay. Second question from Sharon Baker. Love the presentation, love Dr. M's channel. I wonder how we of the poor class can ever gain any significant traction and not get poorer, which is a struggle. Greed can never be satisfied. I guess the question is, how can you empower economically disadvantaged? I hope that's okay, Sharon, that I've paraphrased that.
I think that one thing that I've actually had more faith in as time has gone on is more local forms of government and more communal forms of organisation. Things like cooperatives. I volunteer at a credit cooperative now, which provides credit to people on reasonable terms, which doesn't then go and gamble with the money and then crash and need to be bailed out by the government. I think people like Andy Burnham in Manchester has done a really, really good job as mayor. Sadiq Khan's done a good job as mayor in London, I think. So I don't think it's the totality, but a lot of people who get involved in something like that, whether it's a cooperative, local government, or volunteering or something, that's a predictor, and you'll know this, is a predictor of enormous gains in well-being. And you can feel like you're actually doing something. Because national politics, capital P politics, can just, at the moment, it just feels awful, doesn't it? So maybe you need to engage at a local level and build up economically and politically from there.
Okay. I'm going to combine one question from 2 users online, and I hope that's all right, because I think they're related. Will capitalism in its current form be able to provide a stable and sufficient living standard for the majority of the population? And along with that, the idea of post-growth comes from preserving the environment and being within bounds of planetary well-being. Yeah. Is it a good alternative to the GDP sort of measure?
Yeah. So in its current form, I would say no, because of, I guess what the entire book's about, right? Like the current form we have of capitalism is very much geared towards the rich. It's very much geared away from essential services. And I think that there are a number of what I would consider to be quite radical reforms you could make. For instance, you can give workers control over corporations, right? You can have much higher taxes and restrictions on what the billionaires can do with their money, and you can provide resources for poorer people. And yeah, I just think that those would be really, really big changes. Now, I don't know, capitalism sometimes means different things to different people. So I don't think I'm completely against any form of markets. I would say that I still advocate for that, but it would be something very, very different. And the corporate form in particular, the way businesses would look very, very different. And as for post-growth, you know, I spoke a bit earlier about care, right? And putting more money into care. That would be one of the big shifts we see. Care doesn't really grow in the same way that like manufacturing grows. What's a productivity increase when you're a carer? Like, it doesn't really make sense. Like, do you care for more people? That's a decline in quality. Yeah, take care of loads of people. No. So I think that's actually, if you see that shift in the economy, and there's Tim Jackson is really good on this. He talks about this. You're kind of looking at a move away from conventional GDP growth. So, yeah. So
that does link up to that question. I'll take more questions from the audience. One here.
Good evening. My name's Michael Sinclair, and I coordinate the Deliberative Democracy Collective in Europe for DM25. I'm old enough, being 2 years old in 1950, to see patterns of behaviour. And I think what we're getting near to talking about tonight is the failure of the institutional design of politics. This is the bedrock of what we're really talking about tonight. And it's a politics which it lacks creativity. It cannot change to circumstances. And unfortunately, democracy is commonly thought of as having a vote. But our vote is largely an endorsement of the institutional design of politics. It's the action of voting that is the endorsement of the institutional design, not necessarily what party you vote for. And this is why things are so unchanging, because we vote for systems that benefit the politicians.
So he should comment on that. Okay, vote. Yeah. And I will take one question there. And then at the back there.
First of all, I expected a Simpsons joke somewhere in the slides, but second of all,
you need to buy the book.
My name is Theodore. I'm a master's student here at the LSE, and I've understood that the economics profession is a very dogmatic field, and not many like economists, academic economists, actually give attention to what we are saying, what we're talking about here. Do you think that there is a way that they are finally going to understand, or are we going to have to need another crisis?
Thank you. Question back there. You had your hand up.
Hi, my name is Amna. I'm studying behavioral science here at LSE. So this might be a little bit of a oversimplification of everything you've said, but is the answer to, I mean, I guess I should also read the book then, but is the answer of everything just socialism in this sense, or just some form of socialism?
Okay, thank you. We've got 3 questions there, so over to you, Cahal.
I'll answer that one first. Yes. Yeah. No, I do, you know, I firmly believe in a bigger, this relates to your question as well, because you work in participatory democracy, which is something I should have mentioned earlier as something that's extremely useful, extremely empowering and very good, and you're seeing, I think, a bit of an increase in it. And I think for me, that is the essence of socialism. It's when the people are involved in decision making. And, you know, that can be through various means. You were talking about how the central government and those institutions feel extremely unresponsive. I think that when you've got voting at the level of a business or voting at the level of local government, it can be much more responsive. And for me, socialism is just the idea of expanding democracy and participation at various levels of the economy, you know, wherever it is feasible. And for me, I don't really have an ultimate sort of idealized, fully automated luxury communism in mind. I don't know where it goes, but I do know that I definitely advocate for that now as far as we can do it. And I think that probably leads to socialism. And I think, well, yeah, I think hopefully that kind of answers your question as well, because, you know, this is about making these institutions more responsive to the average person, because you're right, they absolutely are not. And sometimes when you're voting, it can just feel like, you know, you vote in Keir Starmer, and then you obviously don't feel very satisfied with your decision, right? So it's a really, really serious problem, and democracy / socialism are really the only ways to solve it. The economics profession. So, yeah, sorry about the lack of Simpsons references. The economics profession is one that my relationship with it has changed. I think I was really, really angry when I first started studying, and we had the Eurozone crisis. During my lectures, Athens was literally burning, right? There were riots. It wasn't even mentioned at all, right? I didn't know anything about the Eurozone crisis or the financial crisis or the history of capitalism or anything like that. And, you know, we wrote that book, and we had these big debates with the economics profession, and they played out in the newspapers and everything. And there's been some response from some quarters of the economics profession. There's been some changes to the curriculum. But I had a really interesting moment where I was talking to the political scientist Anna Killick, and I read her book, which interviewed 99 politicians across 5 different countries about their use of economics. And not a single one of them said they listened to economists. They all said, no, too abstract, they're too dogmatic, I don't believe anything they said, they don't understand anything about politics, right? And at that point, I was just like, I don't even know if I can be bothered to have a go at the economics profession anymore, because I just don't think they're as important as they once were or thought they were. Now, that doesn't mean that I draw heavily from economics research in everything I do. It's throughout the book. You know, I'm not dismissing the field outright, but I just don't see the need to go at loggerheads with it anymore, because I just feel like the battle now is a very different one. It's not with like the economics profession anymore. I think the battle now is really about wanton anti-intellectualism, right? And in a sense, I would say some economists can be allies in that fight.
Amazing. So I'll take some questions from the live stream now. One is, what is some recent literature you feel is good additional reading for your book?
Oh, yeah. That's a good question. So if you go on, so I was just talking about the economics profession. I would recommend for people who are very critical of it to stay up to date with some of the journals. 2 in particular, the Journal of Economic Perspectives, which just had a special issue on housing, which was really, really good, engaging with all of the things I engage with in the book and more, and the Journal of Economic Literature, which does literature reviews, as the name suggests, and they had some stuff on, they had a big symposium on like race and economics, another issue that I engage with in the book. So I would say, yeah, I would say try to keep up to date with those journals, because they're much more clearly written, they're more accessible than your usual economics journals, and those will keep you updated.
Okay, thank you. This is from Steve Pavitt. Steve from London. Is the UK not on a gentle downward curve of wealth due to trade deficits and demographics? Shouldn't we just get used to it?
Well, I don't think we have to get used to it. So I don't know if a trade. So demographics, I think, is a genuine challenge, because if you've got an aging population, you do generally have fewer people working as a percentage of the population. And then as for the trade deficit, you know, that basically means that we, you know, buy more from the world than we sell to them. I don't necessarily think that that's a huge problem. I don't think that's contributing to us like getting poorer. I think that if you do things like prioritize the investment in the services that I'm talking about, then you're going to get good outcomes regardless of the sort of the aging population and the deficit. So maybe I don't quite understand that question, but I don't fully see the problem.
Okay. Oscar Dimitriopoulos, student from Mount Kelly. How does the development aid affect poverty in LICs, low-income countries?
Oh, God. Can I say I just don't really know much about that?
Fair enough. I think that's an honest
it's better to admit
answer.
when you don't know something.
Exactly.
Say something stupid.
Last question from here. You
Okay.
mentioned that the UK economy doesn't focus on our happiness like some other countries. Why do you think this is the case?
So it's like the gross national happiness question. Yeah. So there's been some talk of like refocusing on these surveys that just ask people how well they're doing in general, and that is something that I think Bhutan are the main country that have done that, right? Why haven't we done this? I mean, we've got more happiness indexes that are more widely available now. Yeah. I think one of the answers, though, is that happiness can be very, very difficult to target. I think, how would a politician, if they want to create growth, they might sort of talk about a big deal that that's being signed with the UK government. Were recently talking about the tech sector from the US was investing a load of money, right? Or they might talk about the government spending a lot of money in investing. With happiness, I don't know like how you really target it. So I feel like it's something which is very, very amorphous, and the subjective well-being questions only get at one part of it. I personally am not sold. I mean, I'd be interested to know your opinions on this, because obviously we've both worked on this.
Yeah, I think you were advocating like a more multidimensional dashboard of indicators, so that gives you a clear indicator, where I think happiness is definitely one of them.
Happiness could be one of them, absolutely.
So it's a crucial indicator, but it might not be the replacement.
Yes.
I guess the idea is to get away from single
measures, exactly.
And have a slightly more sophisticated conversation.
And Bhutan has engaged in quite a lot of ethnic cleansing while they've been reporting that their population is the happiest in the world. So, any measure, if it becomes dominant, can gloss over some not so great things.
More questions from the audience. We've got time. I'll take one question here.
Hi, thank you for your talk. It was really interesting. I was wondering about your last point. Your contention was that conventional economic analysis hasn't really served the majority of people. But then you just said that maybe we shouldn't bash the economic profession as such. But I'm wondering, how do we tackle economic analysis and improve it? Is that some sort of incompetency from the economic school of thought, or maybe some malicious intent from the employment of it? What is your thinking there?
Okay, thank you. Question from here. I might take one. Okay, here. I'm getting an endorsement. There you go.
Hi, good evening. My name is Alex. I'm a student here at the LSE. My question for you, Cahal, is you mentioned a lot about inequality. I wonder, what is your favorite measure of inequality? Is it Gini coefficient? You mentioned about the 20% versus 80% in the US. How should we measure inequality so we can better address it? Thank you.
Well, question from there. Might go for you. Yeah. Outside.
My question is, how do you think we could improve the economy?
Just, okay. Right.
I'm going to take, I think we've got time for 2 more questions.
I actually have another question.
One question, please, if that's all right.
Can I change mine?
Could I go for you here? Yeah.
Okay. My question is, how many sectors are going to be replaced by AI?
Oh, we're all going to be replaced by AI?
Are we going to be replaced by AI?
Okay.
Yeah, thanks for your talk. Just had one question regarding how come a lot of the debate around wealth taxes and increasing taxes on the rich doesn't discuss the fact, the notion of the ultra-rich being very mobile, right?
Yeah.
There's oftentimes this naivety, like this belief that they just sit there and not move to various countries and take advantage of various tax regimes and stuff.
Okay. One last question from the lady in the corner there.
Hi, my name is Rona. I'm a postgrad here at LSE. I wanted to ask, because I have been seeing Gary Stevenson and similar economists saying those things, and I wanted to ask if you had any advice or suggestions about how you can bring up this topic in academic circles without being viewed as some crazy communist and without being discredited and discarded as being naive. Thank you.
Okay. I think we've got 5 questions, Cahal.
We've got 5 questions here.
So we've amped it up.
So yeah, we've amped it up. This is a lot. All right. Let me go through these. So I feel like so you were talking about the economics profession and whether there's been a failure to, let's say, fuel the debate about how to move towards alternative economic indicators. And I think you're absolutely right. You know, I mean, I say, I'm quite happy to criticize the economics profession. I just don't necessarily always make it my focus. But one thing that really they don't do, and this is not actually just economists, is public outreach. Academia is terrible for public outreach. There are absolutely no incentives to speak to governments and people who are influential, to ordinary people. There's nothing, right? There's almost nothing. And it's
Except
a really terrible
LSE
state of
public
affairs.
events now.
Except these, yeah. But, you know, so I do think that it would be nice if, you know, more economists and more academics did more aggressively participate in these debates. But I just think as long as there are no professional incentives to do so, they're not going to. So I think that problem is kind of structural. I can't blame an individual economist for knowing what is going to get them like a stable job and what isn't. Public outreach doesn't get you a stable job. But yeah, I think that's a real issue that you've highlighted. My favorite measure of inequality, so I would typically, with the Gini coefficient, there's a well-known problem with it, which is that it can kind of represent a lot of different distributions. So like if sort of the middle class and the poor get closer to each other, but the rich pull away, the Gini coefficient can stay the same, and then it doesn't seem like inequality is increased. But that's actually what's happened, which is why I prefer like either the top 1% but even increasingly, it's funny with this, it's like the top 1% doesn't even capture it anymore. It's like the top 0.001%, like they're pulling away from everybody. It's like 2,000 people, you know what I mean? You get down to it and it's like, you know, a list of people, it's the Forbes rich list, like, so they're the ones pulling away from everybody else, right? And you see a situation where even the relatively wealthy aren't really driving the inequality. I think it's the really, really, really ultra rich that are. So now I'm kind of on the ratio of the top 0.01% to like the median or whatever, something like that. I would prefer that. I think that captures our current moment.
To add to that, you also make this argument that there's an increasing number of monopolies. So even within industries, there's a consolidation.
Corporate concentration as well. That's also really important. Yeah, absolutely. Are we going to be replaced by AI? I don't know that much about AI. My reckoning is that the amount of investment that has gone into it is outrageous, how much money has gone into it. It dwarfs the housing bubble, it dwarfs the dot-com bubble. It's crazy. And the strange thing about AI is, although everybody uses it kind of for fun and as a therapist apparently, don't do that, but apparently everybody's using it for everything. There isn't actually that much of a clear use case for people in business. And I think it's Microsoft, is it Microsoft GitHub that's like the one that they have quite a lot of customers. They've got 1.8 million customers. They are making $20 of loss on every single customer. And they're the ones that are actually selling it instead of providing it for free. Now, I'm not saying AI doesn't have its uses. It does have kind of transcription and summaries and things like that. It can be a useful tool. But the market cap for like NVIDIA is just way outstrips anything. So I don't think that AI is actually going to replace our jobs, except because it's such a big bubble, it might just ruin everything anyway. God. So, God, I've gotten so lost.
I should also say that every time you ask AI something, even if it's a small thing, there's actually quite a big carbon footprint to the AI. So it's not just about the benefits, it's also about the costs of AI.
It is also trained by very poor workers under not very good conditions as well. It doesn't just come from nowhere, so you've got to bear that in mind. As for wealth taxes, so the mobility of the wealthy. Now, I've actually been looking into wealth taxes really, really recently, and I'm a skeptic for some of the reasons you outlined, the mobility of the wealthy. Also, a lot of wealth is like stock market valuations, which can jump around a lot. It's kind of difficult to capture it in the same way that you can kind of tax income. Now, the economist Gabriel Zucman has done a lot of work on this, and he basically has said that he thinks we should just make it harder for rich people to move. So there are two ways you can do that. One, and the weird thing is, the USA, although it's known for its high levels of inequality and its low levels of socialism, already does this. You just get taxed based on your country of origin. So if you're from the US, you're from the US and you're getting taxed, right, even if you move. There's also the idea of like taxing people who change citizenship at the point of changing citizenship. So there are some ways to make the wealthy less mobile, but I think if there is a wealth tax, I don't think it's a panacea. You know, we were talking about Gary's economics and stuff. I don't think it is going to solve every problem. I can see one being used at quite a low rate globally as a way of just knowing how much wealth the wealthy have. Because if you tax people, you need to measure it. And even if you're taxing them at quite a low rate, and Thomas Piketty in his famous book Capital said this, he said, it's about kind of understanding how much they have. But essentially, I do think that any wealth tax would need to be global. And the big thing I would say as well is, you know, rich people don't pay the taxes they already owe. And I don't know when we stopped talking about that, because it's like, I don't think we necessarily need new taxes. We can work on enforcement. But, and on that note, how do I avoid getting called a crazy communist? I mean, I don't. I get it all the time. And I also get called, you know, a lily-livered liberal as well. So, you know, I get it from both sides. But I think, really, you know, there are certain audiences that are more kind of professional mainstream economists. Maybe they're more centrist in their political alignments. They don't want socialist revolution. They don't really know what that means. It scares them. So I think you just have to learn the lingo a bit, right? And economics is kind of the language of power. Learn the lingo a bit, couch it in these technocratic terms. Can we raise efficiency with a wealth tax? You know what I mean? Leave it as an open question, because it is an open question, right? And so you should treat it as that as well, in an honest way. But I think strategically, speak their language.
I'm going to take a couple of questions from the live stream. Felix Lakin, student from Westminster School. To what extent is our economics education responsible for our failed economic thinking?
This is such a difficult question. So I think I talked about inflation targeting at the start of my talk, right? And it seems to me that that is identifiably an idea that's come straight out of economics textbooks and into policy, into central bank policy. Central banks targeting inflation, every undergraduate learns about the models that underpin that, the reasons for it, credibility, you know, keeping inflation low, independent central banks that are out of the hands of kind of meddling politicians. That's something that's come straight from the idea, from economics, as is the school of antitrust, which is the regulation of monopolies that we have at the moment, the Chicago school, where you only focus on price. It doesn't matter how big the company is getting. It doesn't matter about how it's treating its workers or smaller business. It doesn't matter that it's buying them out. Mergers and acquisitions don't matter as long as the price is low. This is the model Amazon has used, and now they are extremely powerful, right? Because they offer low prices, and that's deemed to be enough, but it misses all the other things that Amazon does that might corrupt the industry. And, you know, there are a few other examples, right? But there are identifiable areas where economics has directly influenced policy, and the ideas used are straight out of the textbook. On the other hand, most economists are, for instance, loosely kind of open borders. They're really, really pro-immigration because immigration is kind of free market, and they're like, you know, let the global economy go where it may. That is not something that they've like managed to enact into policy, right? Our contemporary debate about immigration is not on those terms, like should we have open borders entirely or should we not, right? It's much more restrictive. So I think there are identifiable areas where economics is influential, but at least as many where it's not.
So, but that seems to me that the answer is that it depends on what's seen as the market versus not market.
Yeah, totally. I think, they're quite free market economists, right? And that kind of that's kind of loosely like right-wing and Thatcherite, but it also cuts across some contemporary political distinctions,
So we have to redefine what the market is. Harry Nichols, going back to your analogy of a single kidney, is the NHS an example of this? And if so, why have we seen increased wait times and a general decline of efficiency in healthcare?
Do we have a single kidney NHS? I think, like, yes, there has been a massive focus on efficiency. I think this was throughout New Labour, right? There was a focus on, like, identifiable outcomes. There's obviously, throughout austerity, there's been a focus on cutting costs. And it's interesting because one of the moments where it hit me that resilience mattered at least as much as efficiency was during the pandemic. And Germany actually had a lot of spare hospital seats, much more than the average in Europe. Now, under the paradigm of efficiency, spare hospital seats are useless. Why have you got those? Use them for something else, right? Make sure we're at capacity, at maximum efficiency. But when the pandemic hit, Germany was much, much better prepared. And I don't think our NHS, it wasn't in that state before the pandemic. They had to build loads of emergency beds, if you remember, and it certainly isn't now.
Are we witnessing a revival to the golden age due to globalization?
A golden age? Yeah, everything's great.
As reflected in the title of the book. Shall we go to Andrew from London? How do we persuade voters that complex problems don't have simple solutions and that people selling them simple answers, such as Trump or reform, are not going to deliver what they hope?
Oh, God, yeah. I mean, I think I think basically people actually do need a simple narrative, and we need to accept that. Now, that's simple, not simplistic, right? And I think, maybe something the more progressive people have tended to do is be a bit more technocratic, a bit more academic, a bit more bogged down in the details. But something like Gary Stevenson, who keeps coming up, his message of tax wealth, not work, that idea that, those are the people who are making your lives worse. Like I said, I have some issues with it. I still think it's a very good political narrative. I don't think it's dangerous. I think it identifies some of the right levers to pull in the economy. So I don't think you can appeal to that broad a cross-section of people, many of whom are just not politically engaged in the way that probably most of us are, without a compelling narrative, and the details can be underneath it, the details and the nuances, they come later, but you have to lead with a good story.
Okay. I'm going to take 2 questions from the audience, one here and one at the back. Could you keep your hand up? Yeah. Go for it.
My name's Ben and I'm from Guildford, and I was wondering, how has the decline of the UK been affected in different regions? So how has it been different in different regions, such as the north-south divide and stuff?
Yeah.
Regional inequality.
Regional inequality, yeah.
Yeah.
You mentioned the word choice in your presentation earlier, and I was just interested if you were going to give Rachel Reeves a little bit of advice before her next budget, what would that be?
Okay. Regional inequality, and what are you going to say to the Chancellor?
What am I going to say to the Chancellor? Stop plagiarising books, but no. Second, that happened. Second, I would say, investment isn't just a cost, right? If you invest money into something, whether that's industrial investment, green investment, or into public services, you do get rewards down the line. It can be good for the budget for you to do those things. And I think that everyone always talks about Liz Truss and how the bond market's panicked. And everyone just forgets that Liz Truss was completely incompetent and didn't know what she's doing. That was really apparent to everybody. She almost crashed the pension system through unthinking policies. It was very clear line from what she was doing to what happened. It doesn't mean that if you spend money towards clear targeted aims that are going to be good for the economy, then the bond markets are going to panic. I just don't think that's the case at all. So, yeah, I think her focus is very narrow. I don't know exactly how I'd phrase that with her. But anyway, so regional inequality. There's a big section in the book about regional inequality, specifically in the UK. And I talk about Blackpool, which is a seaside town that used to thrive from tourism within the UK. I think as some of the mines and factories were closed, but also as people started flying more, it really struggled. And Blackpool now suffers from some of the worst social problems in the UK. There are very high rates of benefit dependency, very high rates of addiction. There are very few opportunities. The high street is largely shuttered up. And I think if you're born in Blackpool, you have a good few years lower life expectancy than like the average in the UK, right? And so regional inequality is just a huge problem in the UK and USA. And we just need to think about like providing some kind of support and employment, especially to these areas. I just think, for me, regional equality is something that actually hits even harder than speaking about income inequality, because you have entire areas where there's just no opportunity and where people are left behind. So, yeah, I think it's actually the most important form of inequality for me.
I'm going to take a question from online. Can we accept that an aging population will get poorer because it's running down its stock of capital? Fair?
Well, not if productivity is increasing, right? So, like, if you're still investing and you're still increasing productivity, and this is actually one argument for a type of growth, right? Then you can do more with fewer people. That's the point of an increase in productivity. So you should be able to sustain more older people.
Okay. Next question from Hia Satwani. How does getting poorer affect developing countries in the long term? Will it slow down a country's growth pace or have other consequences?
Affect developing countries, sorry. So I think, the answer is it depends on the country, because there are a lot of developing countries which have had that status of like developing for a very long time. And Brazil is one of them. And that also applies across Latin American countries where incomes have kind of stagnated or they've increased by very little and inequality has remained stubbornly high. So I think those are afflicted by the very thing that I'm talking about already, right? And I think that it can afflict rich and poor countries alike, that kind of dynamic. So I think it does apply across the board. Now, of course, it doesn't apply to every developing country. China is a counterexample. But yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Yep. You know what? I'm going to take one last question from the audience.
One last question. Make it a good one.
Yeah. Enthusiasm will be rewarded by being selected. Yeah? Okay, there was an enthusiastic way.
Hi, my name is Peter. I'm a student at King's Mouth School. And so my question is, so if you were the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, what would you do? Like, what would you change or adapt in order to increase the efficiency of the economy and essentially make a better standard of living?
I think I would rediscover the idea of the Green New Deal, which is something that was proposed originally in the USA. They kind of did it under Biden with caveats, and then Reeves and Starmer did actually propose one. Massive investment in renewable energy and in public transport in order to try and reduce emissions over the long term. Yeah, I would do that, like a big, big push to kind of get things going again, provide employment, and also protect the environment in the process.
Amazing. Right, so I'm very grateful to you guys for being such an amazing audience, asking all these questions. So big clap to you guys. I'm very sorry I couldn't get to everyone's hands. There were more hands than I could pick at. So I'm sorry that I didn't get to all of you, but Cahal will be here. There are books outside for you to buy if you want to go for the hardback. The paperback will also be coming, but I encourage you to get the hardback so Cahal can sign it for you guys. Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you, Cahal. Thank you, LSE, Karine, for organizing everything, and have a good